All right. Hi, everyone. This is Amar, CEO, co-founder of Bito, and we've got with me today Amit Verma. He's the founding engineer, founding head of engineering at Neuron7. Pretty hot AI focused startup. They just raised $44 million Series B. They're growing about 300% a year, kind of the dream. So Series B startup. Welcome, Amit. Good to connect.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So Neuron 7, so I'll just give a little bit about it, but then, feel free to add, of course. They are really trying to transform how customer service works through AI-powered service resolution hubs. So what does that mean? Well, basically what they're doing is they're going after complex hardware like medical devices, ATMs, oscilloscopes, and trying to help the technicians who are coming on site to be able to bring the right repair parts, processes, and solutions so that they don't just show up on site and then say, oh, now I'm going to diagnose it. Now I need to go get this part. But they've created a whole set of RAG pipelines and all kinds of different complex AI processes to be able to bring the right information, to bear. So pretty cool. Um, well, great, Amit. Thanks. Welcome to have you. So as you know, we want to kind of keep this short and sweet. So we want to dive into a couple of interesting questions that you're facing about AI and engineering. So first question for you today. Tell me something something that super interests you in AI, really that's happening, let's say, outside of Neuron 7, outside of Bito.
If I'd ask the same question, I think an year back, perhaps the whole generative AI revolution that we have been talking about, that would have been pretty fascinating. But the way the landscape has been changing so quickly, um, if you look at the generative AI architecture or the initial BERT paper, everything, the large language models that have been coming in, they were all textual in nature.
Yeah.
Right. Now, and of course, it's a sequence to sequence, or these are sequence to sequence models. But what is very fascinating right now for me is the convergence of this multimodal AI, where it is emerging as a significant trend in AI. Like it's at it for a very long time, we were all dealing with textual data. Um, Now, there are several key factors, of course, I would say, that are changing this evolution. It's not merely about text, it is about image processing, audio, video, and all other kind of systems. So the convergence of all of this coming together, that is extremely fascinating, right? Because now AI is not merely for you and me sitting on a laptop and doing these textual applications, but the convergence of this, the ability to generate video, the ability to analyze video, the ability to generate images, the implications of that, not just for high-tech manufacturing companies or companies like us who are living and breathing these kinds of models. The general usage of this model for people outside of technology or outside who are completely embedded into technology, that's pretty fascinating because the implications of this and the use cases that can come across these multi-model AI is extremely fascinating. This can help people do their day-to-day job. For example, analysis of videos. I was just looking at some of these recent papers that have come out. The analysis of videos and trying to figure out certain procedures, rather than giving me a textual way of hey, move right, do this particular step, etc. If you can actually analyze that part of the video and tell me that this is a 30-second video that is needed for you to do your job, that is extremely fascinating. So the way AI is able to, the multi-model AI is
Yeah.
coming in, it's extremely fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally see because you've got people who are in the field and they're dealing with reality, not just bits, right? So they might want to take a picture, you might want to recognize the situation almost like an AR type thing and match that to something. Are there
Exactly.
certain models you're finding that are really interesting that you're paying a lot of attention to right now, just out of curiosity?
Well,
This keeps
much of
changing
this
all
is
the time.
it keeps changing all the time. Well, that is so difficult to pinpoint. Like if you think about it back in 2015, 16, 17, or 17 timeframe, right? BERT
Sure.
was the only model, and then you move to Roberta and Water. Like different types of language models came in. Um, then the GPT series of models they started coming in. And but if you look in the past 9, 10 months, I think you name a model and perhaps a replica of that model or a different version of that model in open source is available. So it is constantly changing, and we are constantly evaluating newer and newer models every day.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, we're mostly focused on developers and how to help them. So text is still kind of reigns supreme. Of course, there are more image things coming up, but it's a different world than when you're living in. So I totally get what you're saying. All
Yeah.
right, cool. Um, so now let's take a little bit like zoom in a little bit to this year, where as you mentioned, like I feel like Gen AI is kind of changing all the time and things are happening randomly. You hear some announcement and you're like, oh, I got to check that out. So let's say something as you guys have been building your product set, maybe something now that you wish you kind of had known, let's say in Q1 of this year, right? If you look to the beginning of this year, kind of related to your to how you guys are using AI, related to your product development efforts, like what's something you say, oh, I wish I'd known that 9, 10 months ago.
I think there was a point where what ended up happening was everybody started gravitating towards OpenAI, and everybody started gravitating towards these, I would say, GPT family of models, if you will. What people were kind of missing at that point of time is the domain specificity, and I think we had a very very tough time in trying to educate, or we still have a tough time in trying to educate our customers that what is happening right now is many of these models still do not necessarily understand your language, your domain knowledge, your nuances, your specificities, right? So, for example, if you are dealing with an oscilloscope and it's called as a signal analyzer PXA123 series, these models have absolutely no understanding of what are you talking about, right? Uh, in the beginning of, I would say, your question specifically about what was happening in 2024 Q1, there was this whole gravitation towards these newer types of models. And we were also experimenting with many of them. And at one point of time, I think there was this whole, I would say, fear that, oops, you know what? We have been spending so many days and years perhaps to fine tune our model to perhaps make it domain specific. Um, is that kind of knowledge available? Because the very first time you look at ChatGPT's demo, it looks like it understands everything. And that's
Right.
kind of, yeah, it's kind of interesting because the questions that you're asking, it will always come back with an answer, right or wrong. And you know what, ethics and accuracy, I keep saying that we these large language models, ethics and accuracy are optional, right? Of course,
Right.
there are certain layers about ethics that are being built, but everybody has a huge disclaimer that accuracy is optional, right? Now, but what ended up happening at that point in time was this whole fear that these models might the years that we have spent in fine-tuning our own models, it can perhaps is OpenAI or models like these, are these opportunities or are these threats to it, right?
Right.
And
Right.
and I think now what we do understand that these are huge opportunities because what ended up happening back in those days, there was just one single model, OpenAI and GPT-3, and then immediately after that, Llama and Mistral and whatnot, every other model came in. And what we realized was you cannot hang your hat with for your product with just one single model, right? Because you may have different models which actually do different things. So we use a cocktail of models, if you will. Some models are pretty good at summarization. Our own homegrown models are very good at understanding domain specific things. So it actually so the point that I'm trying to make over here is these all ended up becoming opportunities than threats for us. And back in those days in 2024 Q1, all of them looked like a threat, like, oh my goodness, what's going wrong, right? And should we be spending more time creating and fine tuning our own models, or should we actually just go and start integrating with OpenAI? And what we realize, well, they are good for something. GPT-3, 4, 4, they are all good for something. Mistral is good for something. Llama is good for something. Our homegrown models are good for these things. And a solution should actually be able to leverage the best of all of those breeds and bring it together to the customer, because the customer at this point of time doesn't necessarily care about which models are you using. They are interested in the end result. So that threat to opportunity transition took us a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, right? If you think back to late 2022 when ChatGPT launched, I mean, there was kind of this thinking that like, oh my God, this is gonna like this one company, this one set of models is gonna like take over everything, right? And it'll
Yes.
be one model to kind of rule them all. And I think now a lot of us who are practitioners here and kind of working with these, we're like, well, actually costs matter too. And so you're thinking about, well, what is this model good at? Is it fast enough? It's good at X, but not Y. So I need to add this other model. And like you said, there's the whole fine tuning and knowledge. I mean, funnily enough for us, for developers, like just the training window, like what's the cutoff, the not model, knowledge cutoff, and some of the big models like, GPT-4o and stuff, the cutoffs have been pretty far back, like a year and a half. And so then you're like, well, you don't really understand anything about newer stuff, right? So then you're like, hey, is there a new model that's maybe trained on more recent kind of capabilities? I think for you, like you mentioned, of these obscure products, I can imagine that, like, yeah, this general model doesn't have any real sense of this, right? And then,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's true. And what ended up happening was, as I was just mentioning, right, that you ask ChatGPT or any of these LLMs any question, and they will definitely come back with an answer one way or the other.
Yeah, they
Now,
don't they don't like to say I don't know, right?
exactly, and that was one of our, I would say, biggest challenges. Uh, because if you think about it, if you're playing around and tell me 5 ways to fine tune a database and it is running slow, it will come back with 10 perhaps. None of them may be relevant in your use case, but it is definitely going to come back with what you're looking for, or perhaps even what you're not looking for. In our case, if you end up saying, hey, you know what, I'm sitting in front of a signal analyzer, or I'm sitting in front of an MRI device and tell me how to fix it, and let's assume it ends up hallucinating and tells you to replace a particular part, it will definitely come back with something, and ends you telling you to replace a part. That part itself may cost you $50,000. So what's happening is in the first scenario where you're just playing around, there wasn't any dollar figure associated with it. But in my case, if we go wrong, if the accuracy is low, that has clear dollar values in Horia. So I
Yeah.
cannot afford to be wrong in this case. So that I think we had to come
So
up with.
how do you, I mean, I'd love to, like, how do you try to control for, getting just that random response back on that $50,000 part? I mean, are you trying to attach the dollar value? Are you trying to control for hallucinations? What are you doing there?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So that is one of the things that we did recently, something that we shipped recently that we are very, very proud about, and that has got more to do with, I would say, AI explainability. Now, if you think about it, and these are not newer concepts, to be honest. I think we kind of derived lots and lots of our AI principles back from the 2020s or 2010s, where the data management principles were in play, where all that you were doing back in those days, where you're consolidating data from multiple different sources, bringing it together, and then you were creating these different types of frameworks to show where the data lineage aspect, right? So if those, so when you're looking at a particular entity, which is coming from multiple different data sources, you were able to explain where is this data coming from. Kind of put that similar principle or a principle similar to that, the data governance principle, and put an AI governance layer on top of it. So what essentially we did was whenever we are making a suggestion, so we have an AI explainability framework right now. We can actually tell you, hey, you know what, we are asking you to replace a particular part, or we are asking you to try a particular step or a particular procedure or a particular test case. And the reason we are saying that is essentially, well, this is why, because you know what, 50% of the technicians, when they actually ended up doing this, they ended up seeing that there was value in it. Or we ended up seeing that the mean time between failures or the mean time to repair or various different KPIs, they actually were significantly reduced when a particular step or a particular part or particular, I would say, procedure was being implemented. So the ability to explain why we are
Yeah.
saying what we are saying, the annotation for that was extremely important. That not was, that is extremely important because that gives you confidence in what is the AI generating. Otherwise, how do I know? And do keep in mind that these are people who are the user who is using this particular application. The reason he is sitting on your application is because he or she doesn't necessarily know the answer. Um, so he won't know whether you're hallucinating or whether you are not
Right.
hallucinating, right?
Right.
So he's going to take your answer at the face value of it. But what if you really didn't know the answer? So it is very important for the user to gain trust in your application. And when you start showing these annotations or when you start showing where did you learn this from, that becomes very important. So that's the recent, I would say, addition to our application that we built, which we are extremely proud of, because that is giving lots and lots and lots of confidence to people in our solution.
It's interesting. I mean, sometimes I wonder if, like you mentioned, the kind of, you know, explaining your sources. I mean, sometimes I wonder, like, I don't know if the user actually, let's say, cares or even delves into those sources, but I think the fact that, your framework has you tie back a recommendation to that, I think that helps ground the AI model to kind of almost check itself to before it sort of issues a suggestion, because it's kind of saying I need to explain how I got to this recommendation, and we find that kind of things constrains their, let's say, desire to hallucinate. Is that, do you see that, or is it more about telling the user, hey, this is what's behind this?
You're kind of correct that the end user may not always care about it because at the end of the day, their job is to, in this example, fix an oscilloscope or fix an MRI device or fix an ATM or whatnot. Right? So they are not always very, very concerned as to where did you learn this from. But I think having at any point of time, we ourselves need to be confident that this thing is working and it is not hallucinating.
Yeah.
So having that particular feature allows us to give our users that confidence that you know what, if ever you want to drill down, you should be able to drill down and then look into as to where are we learning this from. The other thing, of course, is traceability, right? In the sense that I suggested something, and let's assume in the past 1 month, your average cost to repair suddenly went up because the parts that you were changing suddenly were the most expensive parts. And at that point of time, I think it becomes very, very important for us to go back and see what did we learn, where did we learn this from. So having that traceability or audit, if you will, that becomes very, very important because if I made a suggestion and your numbers are all over the place, then I should be able to explain as to why they were all over the place because looks like there was a new part that was perhaps introduced in the month of or Q2 of this particular year. And looks like most people started using that particular part, so on and so forth. And based upon that, we started making this recommendation and hence, right? Otherwise, what you have is essentially a model which you're not able to explain. And then you can't even go back and say, what is happening in this one? Why am I seeing, let's say, a sudden spike in my cost?
Yeah, very interesting. All right, Amit, so to close this out, give me your top AI prediction for the end of 2025. Where will we be at with AI by the end of 2025?
Um, that's a pretty tricky and an interesting question to look into. A few predictions, perhaps. One of those things that I am very, very keen to see is the shift of AI from cloud computing to edge computing, right? That is definitely gaining momentum with smaller and smaller models, or perhaps smaller models. Smaller models which are much more specific to do a particular type of a job, that would be very, very interesting. And the ability to create such models and deploy, you don't necessarily need an entire GPT-4 or a GPT kind of a model to do the task that you are going to do on a day-to-day basis. So these smaller fine-tuned or extremely specific models which have the capability to run on the edge, and perhaps they're doing just one and only one thing or a few different things, but that is going to help you in, let's say, your day-to-day. That's going to be very, very key. And the reason for that is, of course, that has reduced latency, improved privacy and security, bandwidth efficiency. There are so many interesting factors that might come in if we end up going into a route where we have smaller models which are fine-tuned or are very, very specific to certain use cases. That would be an interesting thing to see. And there are, of course, progresses that are being made in that direction. But I think the cost of running these models in the cloud versus the cost of running an edge model on your mobile
Yeah,
device, I
I think
think
it's
you
going to
can
be
you
like
can
a
see a huge
thousand times
difference.
cheaper, right? I mean, million times cheaper, maybe, you know?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very interesting. All right, great. Well, thank you so much. Great chatting and keep on trucking.
Yep. Thank you. It was nice talking to you.